This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We have here today with us a really special guest, fascinating guy, Leslie James Pickering. Pickering. And he's involved with the Earth Liberation Front movement, but also, too, he's written this book about Sam Melville, who was a guerrilla bomber back in the 60s and the 70s in the New York area. So it's called The Mad Bomber Melville by Leslie James Pickering. And there's a link to that on the Opperman Report blogspot.com blog. Leslie, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much. So, Leslie, tell us about yourself, because I know you have you and yourself have a very, very interesting story yourself. So tell us about Leslie James Pickering.
Well, I guess I'm best known for being a spokesperson for the Earth Liberation Front press office. And what that was is an organization that worked sort of as a media clearinghouse for underground radical environmental activists. So people who would commit sabotage in the name of the Earth Liberation Front would send a communique to me. I would put it in a press release and I would talk to the media about it. That was from like 1996 through 2002. Now I run a bookstore in Buffalo, a radical bookstore called Burning Books.
Well, give us an idea of some of the kind of books that you publish.
Well, I've written a handful of books, including the one we're going to talk about today, Man, Bobber, Melville. I've also done a book on the Earth Liberation Front, and I've done a book on a group called the Evan Mecham Eco-Terrorist International Conspiracy, which is kind of like another radical environmental group that predated the ELF, the Earth Liberation Front, from the 80s and early 90s. And I've also helped to edit some different books and written some pieces for various books on just all kinds of radical left, and especially radical guerrilla groups. Kind of my specialty is left guerrilla history.
Okay, very good. And you yourself had a little trouble with the FBI surveillance.
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, you're releasing communiques for underground groups that are causing hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. You get a little attention from the FBI and other government agencies. So starting when I was 19, back around 1997, I had extensive interaction with the FBI and was raided at 2 points by the FBI and affiliated law enforcement organizations, once in January of 2000, and then again in April of 2001. There were 7 federal grand jury subpoenas issued on the topic and a congressional subcommittee subpoena issued. And basically, there was, from between that time period of like 1997 to 2002 or so, just constant interaction with federal law enforcement because they were trying to capture members of the Earth Liberation Front, and they were not having very good luck. And I was what they saw as the only link to the underground at that time period, so they were putting a lot of pressure on me. Since then, I've uncovered continued surveillance on me and on our bookstore here, Burning Books. And let's see, September of 2012, we found out that there was a U.S. Post Office mail cover. So they were copying all of my incoming mail and forwarding it to the FBI. And the FBI was also calling friends across the country and asking all kinds of questions about me. And there was a grand jury subpoena here in Buffalo. Now we found out there's been at least 4, but we don't know a whole lot of details about those. And then I was put on the secondary security screening selection list with the TSA at the airport. So it's kind of like the infamous do not fly list, except they let you fly, but they force you to go through the heightened amount of security, everything that they've got, so pat downs and chemical swab tests and everything like that. So a whole bunch of this stuff happened in late 2012. We kind of found out about some of it by our own investigation and just happenstance. And we've filed lawsuits against the FBI and the ATF and other federal agencies for failing to comply with the Freedom of Information Act because they're trying to get government files on what they're doing. So we've sued and won against the FBI at this point, and I'm in the process of getting a 30,000 plus page FBI file processed and released to me. I've just gotten the first batch of those at the end of last month. So right now I've got about 375 pages in my hand. I'm waiting for the rest.
What a wonderful life, you know. It's so draining, man, dealing with these people, you know.
It can be, yeah.
Let me ask you this real quick. Now, you said that they were copying your mail. Were they copying the outside of the mail, or were they actually opening up the mail and copying the inside as well?
Yeah, it's a program called a mail cover. It's part of the U.S. Post Service, and it's actually very old. It's well over 100 years old. But it's not as exciting as like a phone tap. You know, in the movies you hear about phone taps all the time or whatever. This is actually older than that, and it's been used maybe more often. But you hear very little about it. So what they do is they photocopy the outside of your mail, front and back, you know, whatever, just kind of keep tabs with who you're communicating with. And then they send those photocopies to whatever law enforcement agency requested it. So it's a program with the post office, and they have to go, and the law enforcement agency that's requesting it has to go through an application process and convince the postmaster at your local post office to do this. Postmaster agrees, and then they send it in a 30-day period. They'll send 30 days worth of copies, and they have to renew. Like I said, there's been many of these throughout history. People very rarely find out about them. So I actually, by accident and incompetency at the post office, they actually left a secret memo about it on top of my mail, and then it got mixed in with my mail and put right into my mailbox. So that's how I found out about it.
Oh, boy, amazing. Now, Burning Books, do you have an address for that, a website for that?
Yeah, burningbooksbuffalo.com. It's all one word. We are in Buffalo at 420 Connecticut Street. We are a friendly neighborhood radical bookstore. We got all kinds of books on all kinds of topics and all things radical and political. So we hold a lot of events, and you can get a lot of our stuff online, so you should check it out.
And you have enough local support to support this bookstore?
Yeah, doing great.
That's encouraging.
You know, it's big support here in the community, and of course, all this exposure of all this surveillance that I've been under has only helped. You know, we've gotten a lot of media attention locally and nationally and internationally around this issue. So, you know, it kind of keeps things lively around here. And we bring in a lot of speakers. We've had a lot of high-profile speakers here at the bookstore and a lot of big events and film premieres and stuff like that. So just keep going, and we're doing all right.
Okay, very cool. If you have any books you want to promote, send them my way, and we'll see if we can get the authors on.
Excellent, thanks.
Okay, tell us about Mad Bomber Melville, this book that you wrote.
It was actually my master's thesis, and then it got turned into a book afterwards. So Sam Melville grew up around here, around Buffalo, New York, and just when I found out about him, I just kind of related to him because he came from my part of the country, and he got involved in very radical politics, including some guerrilla struggle and underground stuff, which is my favorite thing. So when I found out that he was from this area and had done these things he had done, I really wanted to look into him. There wasn't a whole lot out there published about him, so I gathered what there was, and I did a lot of research and wrote like the first and only really complete biography on him. So, you know, he got involved in the anti-Vietnam War protest around Columbia University and in the New York area, and got radicalized pretty quick. And he was much older than a number of the typical, hippie activists from that area. He was like in his mid-30s, so he had he had a lot to deal with, and he very quickly went from sort of militant protest to underground activity. He had done a lot of work in skyscrapers and large buildings as sort of an engineer, structural engineer, and a plumber. So he understood the way that these buildings would work, and he was living in Manhattan at the time. So he decided to go on a bombing spree and try to destroy some of these huge corporate buildings that were involved in the Vietnam War, especially that were in Manhattan. Was very successful at that.
And this was like a one-man operation?
Not really. Yes and no. I mean, he was definitely like a driving force, but there were other people that were working with him, and eventually there was a collective of people that controlled a quantity of dynamite that they had robbed and used for these bombings. So there were several people. Melville was convicted, and there were a couple of other people convicted with him, and he tried to take the heat for the whole situation, basically. And there were quite a few people that have not been indicted or charged or convicted. So there's definitely more people involved, but in terms of really taking the initiative and having more or less of like a leadership role, it's kind of pinned on him.
Yeah, I was reading something that in this last bombing, the one he got caught in, he was like partnered up with a guy that was an informant.
Yeah, so everyone has their flaws, and he decided to choose to trust this guy, George Demerly, who was a well-known, a yippie, actually an offshoot of the yippies who were called the Crazies. So, he was somebody who worked with Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin pretty closely. In fact, Jerry Rubin wrote about his devastation finding out that Demerly was an informant in one of his books. So, he trusted this guy. He was older. He was like Sam's age, and and this guy talked a lot of radical talk. A lot of people didn't trust him, but Sam decided to trust him, and he was going to do an action with him. And this guy turned out to be an informant, and it tipped off the New York Police Department and the FBI, who arrested both of them in the middle of a bombing that they were trying to carry out at an armory in Manhattan. So that's how we got busted.
Yeah. Now, how connected was he with the Weather Underground and the Black Panthers?
Well, the Black Panther were going through a trial at the time in New York City called the Panther 21 or the New York 21 trial. Right. 21 Black Panthers were being charged with a whole range of conspiracies, including bombing the Bronx Botanical Gardens. These were just plots. They never happened, and the Panthers actually had no interest in doing those things. After 2 years of being in prison and going through trial, they were found not guilty, but at the time it was a huge cause in the New York area, the Panther 21. And so one of the bombings that Melville did was actually targeting the courthouse where the Panther 21 were on trial, and that bomb went off the day that Sam was arrested and destroyed the courthouse. So he was pretty close with that, and pretty involved with the Panthers in the New York area. And in terms of the Weather Underground, I mean, there were a lot of connections there too. There were some other people working with Melville who were also close with the Weather, but at the time they weren't the Weather Underground yet. You have to understand, one of the biggest things about Melville is that he was kind of the first to do this thing. Weather Underground kind of looked to what Melville had done as inspiration, as an idea of what they could do. So they were doing, militant street protests around the time in 1969, and fighting police and engaging in radical activity, but they had not yet gone underground, and they were not yet engaging in guerrilla sabotage bombings like Melville had done. So there was a lot of influence there on the Weather Underground coming from Sam Melville and the people who worked with him.
Gotcha, yeah, and the Panther 21, that was actually the longest trial in New York State history that went on. And a lot of these Panthers represented themselves. John Africa represented himself in that trial, and was later on the target of the group when they were targeted, moved down in Philadelphia. We did another show with Ramona Africa, who's the only survivor to get out of there alive besides the young boy, Birdie. We had her on our show, and that's a fascinating story because, they were actually was shooting at her when they were trying to escape from that burning building. And then
they were shooting out the back. Yep.
Yeah, then they gave her 15 years in prison on top of that.
Yep. God bless America.
Yeah, right. It's hard to believe. I think if the average person knew about these things, they'd be outraged.
You would think, but you'd also be surprised at the lack of outrage of the average person sometimes.
I know. They're just so quick to say, well, they deserve it. And if you look at the whole Move situation, too, the original attack on Move, the grounds for the attack on that freestanding home, the original one where the cops got shot back at, the grounds for that attack was stuff like they didn't have Venetian blinds on their windows.
Oh, yeah, or they were composting, or they had chickens, in their yard.
It was ridiculous code violations that they showed up with a SWAT team to affect this eviction. Just unbelievable. Now,
it is unbelievable. Yeah. And the thing is, like, these things aren't hidden. They're not top secret. They're a part of the history. That Move confrontation was all over the news.
Right.
It's just that people choose to focus on, or they're convinced that they should focus on what they should buy or what the latest sports team is doing or whatever. So, things, you forget about them. But really, if you look at our history, we've got example after example after example of this extreme repression and people struggling and fighting and sacrificing to achieve the kind of world that we all want to live in.
Yeah, but you know what? Even like on Facebook, you'll see people will put up this meme of the attack on Waco, the Branch Davidians in Waco, and they'll say more people died in Waco by an attack by the federal government than died in Sandy Hook. But even those people, and then I'll post my interview with Ramona Africa, and I said, well, you're aware of Move, where they burned down a whole block, they burned down 60 homes, and most people, even that they're objecting to Waco, aren't even aware of that. Yeah. Let's not get depressed.
Well, that's what I'm trying to combat that. That's why we have this bookstore. Everything in here is about radical history, radical movement. So I think it's an important thing to pay attention to. People should pay more attention to it, learn more about it.
I hear you. Now, what do you think of the legacy of Melville? Before we get into the whole Attica stuff, but then his direct actions that he was doing using explosives. Do you think it was effective or in the long term, or do you think it might have been counterproductive?
Well, I feel it's rather effective. But to backstep a little bit, there was a group in Quebec, an independence group, the FLQ, that was doing these kind of bombings in an effort to win independence for Quebec from Canada. And there were a couple fugitives from that group that Melville harbored in his home. He took them in and helped them out, and actually helped them hijack a plane to Cuba after a little while. But before he did that, he had a lot of conversations with them about how to pull these kinds of things off, how they made their time bombs and where they placed them, and how they made phone calls without being identified and stuff like that. So he looked into all that kind of stuff from people who had firsthand experience, and then he decided, from there he figured out how he wanted to apply it. And then if you look after Melville, I mean, people know the Weather Underground name, but really starting in the very early 70s, late 69 and into, throughout the whole 70s, there was just huge flood of sabotage actions. A lot of them were dynamite bombings, just like Melville's, by not just the Weather Underground, but a number of guerrilla underground groups that were operating during the time and even into the 80s. And, Melville's really the first. And his actions were rather impressive and inspirational. So I think that he really did have a big effect at getting people, to realize that they can fight back and that they can win in these kind of ways. And really all these other groups that started, have a sort of a debt to pay to him, in terms of showing that people can form, guerrilla bands and strike back.
And even in Abby Hoffman's book, Steal This Book, he talks about different methods to gum up the system, like putting crazy glue on the locks at these office buildings and stuff. And even when we had Lorenzo, you talked about hijacking a plane to Cuba, because I had Lorenzo Kumbawa Irvin on the show, the Black Panther.
Great.
Yeah, great guy. I loved him. Oh man, what a heroic guy! What a story he has, man. He's running through the streets of the Czech Republic, man. The CIA is trying to run him over in his car. This guy's got some story, man. They should do a movie about that. But he was saying, they got to do a movie with it. But he was saying how we all have to gum up the system every day in everything that we're doing,
right?
In order to resist this, whatever, it should be just like a natural habit. you know?
Right.
And Abby Hoffman used to talk about, you take a brick and you put a stamp on it and throw it in the mailbox. It's nonviolent, protest that slows things down because it cogs up the wheels of it gums up the cogs. Oh, boy.
Right. Yeah, and if you have the skill and you have the ability and you're willing to take the risk, you can go a lot farther than that, which is exactly what Melville did. I mean, on one night, he and accomplices bombed 3 skyscrapers in Manhattan simultaneously. General Motors, Chase Manhattan, and Standard Oil all went off at the same time. I mean, that was amazingly inspirational for people. Thinking that not only, a lot of times people would be calling and making bomb threats or something like that back during that time period, but this was no threat. Those buildings were totally wrecked. Like glass would blow out the side of the building and just rain down on the streets. And it's right in Manhattan, so it's not like people didn't notice it. So, these were very big, spectacular, high-profile actions that was keeping the NYPD bomb squad on its toes for quite a while.
But now, you don't see this kind of activism today. Now, why do you think that is?
Well, there's a lot of repression. But it wasn't very long ago that you saw similar activity with the Earth Liberation Front. And I imagine it won't be all that long before you start to see it again with some other organizations. It basically comes in waves, if you look at it historically. People get upset about labor conditions, back in the 20s or whatever, and started doing guerrilla-type activity, and then all this repression came in, and people went to jail, and some people got killed, and then it came up again in the 60s and in the 70s, and then, again, people went to jail, and some people got killed and got scared off. And it came back in the 90s again with ELF and other groups, and then, the same thing happened again. Some people ended up going to jail, some people got killed. But you can't, you can't imprison a movement, right? Fred Hampton would say you can't kill the revolution. You can kill an individual, but you can't kill a movement. So even if it seems like you don't see the stuff right now, it's just a matter of time before people fight back again. And, it's not like these problems have been solved. So, we still got the problem, and people are struggling to find a solution. So
yeah, if
that's
anything,
how it goes.
The problems are getting worse. We have a situation now where the average person is getting shot down. Unarmed people are getting shot down in the street on a weekly basis, and there's no objection whatsoever. And the average person is saying, well, they should not be committing crime. Unarmed people getting shot down in the streets.
Yeah, it's strikingly similar to the situation that spawned the Black place. I mean, the Black Panthers were, witnessing unarmed black males and getting shot down in the street by the Oakland police, and that's why they formed their organization to defend the community and defend those people against it. So, like right now, you're seeing a lot of radical demonstrations against, that kind of police brutality. And, I think it's just a matter of time before things get, even more intense, especially when these killings keep happening.
So you feel optimistic that there is a groundswell that's coming up that's going to turn things around?
Yeah, I can't say when, but I think there's always a groundswell that's boiling up in one place or another. They might be able to say the environmentalists now are the big terrorists and throw them all in prison, but, then they didn't pay any attention to the hackers. And then the hackers came, on the heels of the environmentalists. And so it's always going to be something. So yeah, I'm optimistic. You can't keep the people down. People are going to fight for freedom and justice, and, they're going to make sacrifices and fight hard, and it's not always going to be pretty, but that's the way the movement is. That's the way the struggle goes. And, it can't be stopped. The only way to stop a justice movement is by, letting it, win, giving it what it needs to give, freedom. And so until they decide to give the freedom and the justice that the people are struggling for, hand that over one way or another, well, then the movement's going to be here, and it's going to be hard to deal with.
Okay. I have coming on the show soon, Trevor Aronson, who wrote the book, The Terror Factory, Inside the FBI's Manufactured War on Terrorism. Oh, yeah. Right, yeah. And the whole theme of the book is about how all these big terror arrests you see nowadays, or whatever, they're all created by the FBI. They're all FBI informants and, agitators in there causing the event. And then the FBI swoops in and arrests their own event that they started. you know?
Right.
So with that kind of thing being so prevalent, how does anybody organize these days?
Well, that type of thing is actually very prevalent. Entrapment, is very prevalent,
Right.
and seems to be a very common tactic of the FBI and other law enforcement agencies at this point. But when you really think about it, it doesn't do anything to stop people who actually might do that kind of stuff. What it does is it takes people who are just kind of on the periphery of a movement or maybe just getting involved, and it throws them in prison unjustly, and then gets people to organize around their cause, to freeing them. But it doesn't actually put them, the government doesn't put the FBI in any better position to stop people who are actually doing it. With the Earth Liberation Front, I mean, it was like almost a decade before any major actions were solved. I mean, and we're talking about 36 of the biggest sabotage actions in this country's history, over $250 million in damages, targeting a number of government agencies and a number of corporations, high-profile corporations. So it's not that these things can't be done. They can actually be done fairly well and pretty successful. And really, the government isn't really all that well equipped at all to solve these crimes. They're waiting. They've got the kind of a standard recipe to solve these crimes, and when people understand that recipe and they take their actions planned around avoiding that strategy, well, then they can actually get away with things pretty well, as we saw with ELF and a number of other groups like the Weather Underground. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies aren't that well equipped to solve these kind of crimes. In reality, what they are well equipped to do is scare people out of doing them in the first place, and that's what they do. With all these high-profile terror convictions all the time, and people feel hopeless. They feel like they can't do anything themselves, like they can't make a difference, and they certainly aren't able to take on this big bad FBI or this big bad U.S. government on their own. So they just kind of go home and forget about it. But you can only be scared for so long, before you decide that you're not scared anymore.
With these groups like in Ferguson that came up, and these are definitely organic groups that are coming up out of righteous indignation to what they saw happen to a kid in their neighborhood, Ferguson especially. But then you have swooping into town guys like Al Sharpton, who for a long, long time, is a well-known FBI asset, was wandering around New York City with a briefcase making cases for the FBI. He had a phone in his apartment, his luxury apartment, a red phone. Every time he picked it up, the FBI was recording everything he made on that phone. Now, what do you make of something like that? Like, are these people gullible? Are we gullible to allow this man into a room after he's been an FBI informant and actively working undercover for the FBI?
People just don't know that history, and realistically, it's unfortunate, but realistically, most people, don't know that about Sharpton or don't know about that kind of history in general. We're taught to learn everything that we can learn about the latest sneaker that's out there, but when it comes to important issues of significance like that, you really have no idea. People will be lucky to know who Al Sharpton is, let alone that he's, worked with the FBI before. So, it's unfortunate, but we have a long way to go in terms of being prepared to win this battle.
Now, what about you? You're on the front line. Have you had any kind of infiltration, any kind of operatives trying to insert themselves into your life?
Yeah, yes, I have. A number of incidences like that. Some of them are vague and hard to prove. And others are detailed in a pretty thorough manner in the files I just got from the FBI. One of which I can't really speak about at this point, but there's some articles that are in the works right now about infiltrators here coming into our bookstore here, to events here at our bookstore within the last couple of years, and alleging huge conspiracies to the FBI that they knew weren't true, causing the FBI to launch a 2-year investigation into me in the bookstore here. So these things do happen. It's actually not even uncommon. There's quite a bit of surveillance and infiltration that happens, and people never even know because no indictments, no case ever comes out of it. It's just information gathering, or maybe they tried to, they tried to make a case and they weren't able to make it, so, which was the case with me. But, these things are actually like a very significant part of any movement that struggles for justice. You have the FBI didn't just do this to the Black Panthers. They've actually been doing it to pretty much everybody who's gotten anywhere in the struggle for justice. So you got to be ready to deal with repression if you're trying to fight for justice, because they go hand in hand, unfortunately.
Yeah, it just came out in mainstream media that the FBI has been surveilling and attending Burning Man.
Yeah, you can only imagine, the intelligence they've been gathering at that. But yeah, they've got huge budgets. Post 9/11, the terrorism budget went way up for all these law enforcement agencies, and so they get a big boost. They hire a bunch of new people. They get a bunch of new equipment. But the thing is, if they want to get that same amount of money next year, they have to justify their budgets by having some kind of investigation. That preferably, in their point of view, comes up with some kind of results. You can't give a local field office of the FBI, a couple extra $1 million one year and then see nothing come out of it and then think that they're going to get it the next year. They want some results. So that's what they do. They launch these investigations. And if you're, a field office that covers the desert in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing going on, you never know. Maybe you'll go and investigate Burning Man. I don't know. But here in Buffalo, it's not like there's a wealth of radical activity around. So they came and investigated this bookstore, which is engaging in fully protected free speech activity. And they really launched a full-on investigation. So that's America. That's how it works. If you think that you're going to solve problems by signing petitions and holding signs and electing people, you're in for a bit of a surprise, because that's not how change works in this country at all. And if you're going to make any progress, what you're going to have to deal with is some pretty extreme surveillance, repression coming from some very powerful organizations such as the FBI. So you better be ready for it.
I recently had Betty Metzger on the show, who wrote the book The Burglary.
Excellent.
Oh, yeah, you know her? Okay, good.
Sounds like you got a pretty good lineup here.
All right, I'm trying. I'm trying.
That's great.
Yeah, I found the real niche here, because we do a lot of true crime, conspiracy theory, and then we get these... you know who I had on, too? I had the FBI agent that was in charge of the anthrax investigation, Richard Lampert.
No kidding.
Yeah, but Betsy Metzger, when she talked about that burglary, she talked about how when they uncovered these documents, that the FBI was investigating anybody that was African American. Didn't matter if they were activists or whatever. Just being black was it. That's all you needed. And
just African American student associations. That was one of the first things that came out with that burglary of those files, was that that they were investigating apolitical African American student association.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that happens now. Nothing has really changed. They got a slap on the wrist, and for a few years they, kind of cowered in the background. But, Reagan came in, things turned around, and pretty much right back where we started in that case. So, if you're going to fight for justice of any kind, you got to be prepared and realize that the result is often repression from groups like the FBI.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, I was talking to somebody else recently too. We got off. We were going to talk about something else, but then we got onto the state of the movement. What's going on now. And he was talking about how he had interviewed, all these famous activists and resistance fighters, and how he was so surprised that they were outraged that they were under, surveillance and harassment and arrests, and that they were just indignant about this. And he was like, "Well, what do you expect? What were you expecting?"
Right.
So true. Now,
yeah. For me, in all honesty, I kind of knew that what I was getting into was radical, and although it might technically not be illegal, it was like heavily frowned upon by the government and people in high positions of power, and that it was going to draw the attention of the FBI. I had at least enough background knowledge and information to realize that the FBI would be watching me if I'm putting out communiques for the ELF. So that was something that I had to sort of acclimate myself to at a young age. Like I said, 19 years old when I first got involved in that. So and it hasn't really stopped since. It's been almost 20 years now. But, most people don't get into the movement that way. They get in because, they want to protect puppy dogs or whales or, they want to stop police shooting unarmed black people. And even if they know that these horrible things happen, it's a difference between knowing sort of in a textbook sense that these things happen and then experiencing them firsthand, I'm friends with Ramona, who you just talked about having on your show earlier. She's amazing. You see her in person and you're like, wow, she's such a cool, amazing, strong person. And you realize that, her whole family was just killed in this house. She was the only adult survivor. And it was a FBI C4 bomb that was dropped by the Philadelphia police on her house, and they just murdered all these people. It's a harsh reality. But if we don't recognize it, then we're ill prepared to deal with what's ahead.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm 53 years old. Yesterday was my birthday. And
happy birthday! Oh yeah, I saw that on Facebook.
Oh, you saw that? Okay. And I know it was never ending, man. All right, I get it. Happy birthday! I couldn't use Facebook all day. But what do you call it? I started out 17 years old at the Yippies in New York City. I just wanted to go to the Marijuana Day Parade, and then next thing I know, I was completely radicalized. And then I saw the surveillance and the infiltrators and the agent provocateurs that just were every area of your life, just all over the place, just unbelievable. So that's what radicalized me, at a very young age.
Right. I mean, the Yippies had a ton of repression. You think, what they're running a pig for president? You think the FBI could just ignore that, but they totally did not ignore that. They threw the book at him, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. So. And it never stopped. Dana Beal just recently, he was just in jail for some marijuana. And marijuana's probably legal all over the place.
Right.
And they grabbed, what's that, 70 years old, man, and now they got to grab him at the end of his life. And throw him a couple of duffel bags full of pot. But back to Melville.
Yeah.
So then, even when they caught him, how about his trial? Was that a big public trial?
It really wasn't. He had a good public support team, but he was so radicalized at that point and totally felt like theatrics in the court were not something he was interested in doing. That he did not have a big public trial. One of the co-defendants went underground and evaded the law for a number of years, and he and one other co-defendant ended up doing prison time. And he never made it out of prison alive. And it's kind of fitting because it is the 44th anniversary of the Attica prison uprising right now today. Actually started yesterday, 44 years ago yesterday. So he was organizing within Attica prison when he got transferred there, amongst sort of a mixed racial group of people who were against prison conditions and for revolution in general. And when things hit the fan on the 9th of September 1971, he was right in the middle of it. And of the people that were killed by the state troopers who retook the prison, Melville was right on top of the list. All different kinds of stories about his death in particular, some of them conflicting, but what isn't debatable is that he was shot in the chest with buckshot by a state trooper, and that he was targeted, he was pinpointed as a leader, and more or less one way or another sort of put on a list for execution during the retaking. So it's an intense situation. It's somebody who would not give up. I found that inspirational. I found it pretty powerful stuff. And you get arrested. A lot of times you get arrested, and people in the movement get arrested, and they feel like the movement's over. And Melville went through feelings like that too, but he decided not to give in to them. Decided to keep fighting any way that he could. And the Attica prison uprising is the biggest prison uprising in this country's history. It's a huge thing in this area, and people remember it all the time. So I was just out at Attica today, and every year around this time in that town, everyone's kind of tense, remembering what had happened out there and realizing that the balance of power in this country is not as stable as people might think. So I found Melville's story all the way from becoming a guerrilla fighter to going to prison and staying on the front lines in prison. I found that very inspirational, so that's why I wrote that book.
Yeah, I definitely want to do a whole show about Attica one day, the Attica riots, because a lot of people don't even know what you're talking about. These young kids, they're all fascinated with 9/11,
right,
and all this stuff, man. And you're just trying to tell them, what's really been going on in this country. They just woke up a couple of years ago, quote unquote woke up, and then yet they think Obama's a communist, Obama's a socialist. They're so woken up, You gotta smack these kids. But about Attica, though, give us a little idea what happened with the Attica riots, because guards died at the end of the Attica riots, but they died at the hands of the other guards.
I can do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So, conditions within the prison were bad. They were probably worse at Attica than anywhere else in upstate New York here, of any of the New York prisons. But, prisons in general were bad. They were swelling with radicals at that point. This is the early 70s, so you got a number of Black Panthers and young lords and other, radical activists who are being sent to prison, people from the Weather Underground. And the kind of, Attica, New York at that time had this strange idea that they would put all the political people more or less into one prison so that they wouldn't infect the other prisons. And they chose Attica. They chose one particular block in Attica, which is like a D block, I believe. And, that obviously didn't have the most desired effect. I mean, these people organized together and got the rest of the prisoners, almost all of them essentially, in the prison to be radicalized and to be ready to issue a set of demands. And these demands were shocking to people when they went public because, they were just basic human necessities. We want to make more than 6 cents a day for our work. And, we want to get more than one shower every 2 weeks and things like that, that did more to show people what, how repressive life was like in the prisons than anything else. And that the New York State Prison, Department of Corrections was not about to grant these basic human rights to these people was pretty amazing. And that Governor Rockefeller wouldn't even come and meet with them during this 5-day standoff was just pretty astonishing to people. So it really became the major news story of the week for sure, if not a lot longer. But an incident happened on the morning of the 9th, September 9th, 1971, and sort of a fight broke out. And the prisoners overcame the guards and took control of a good part of the prison, a quarter of it. When a lot of the prisoners had joined them, and there were, hundreds, well over 1,000 people involved. And they held the prison for 5 days, and they issued demands, and they had these negotiators come in. And so they had 5 days of negotiations, and they had people from the New York Times and people from the Black Panthers on the negotiating team and a whole lot of other attorneys and prominent radical people at the time helping to negotiate between the radicals and the state. And negotiations started to break down a little bit, not even really all that much, but a little bit. And truth be told, New York State was not willing to bend at all. And so they were seeing the whole thing as an embarrassment and decided to retake the prison with force on the morning of the 13th of September 1971. And when they did, I think it was 42 or 44 people were killed. Of course, the prisoners didn't really have any weapons, right? They had maybe some sticks or some homemade knives or whatever that they could round up inside the prison, but they didn't have any guns or any helicopters or anything like the state of New York did. So they flew some helicopters over the yard where the prisoners were in there. And then, remember, they're still in the prison. They're trapped in the prison, mostly living outside in this yard that's a caged in. And they flew these helicopters over the top and dropped tons of tear gas in there. And then they just opened fire on these people, some people call it turkey shoot, all these prisoners in the yard, and there's all these guards up on the tower just shooting them, and all these New York State troopers just shooting them, and all these people died. And 9 of the people that died, if my numbers are correct, were actually prison guards that were taken hostage. And these guards weren't harmed by the prisoners. In fact, some of them even said they were being treated really well. But the police basically chose the section of the yard where the prisoners were, the hostages were, and the prisoners who were holding the hostage where they were. They chose that area as a primary place to open fire on. So a bunch of those people were killed, but New York State decided, I don't know how they thought they'd get away with this, but they decided that to claim publicly in the media, like immediately, that the prisoners had killed those guards, that they had slashed their throat and even like cut off their genitals. They made these pretty outrageous claims. And so the first day of the news was that essentially the prisoners had slashed the throats of the hostages. And so New York came in and state troopers came in, they opened fire. And so that was like day one of the news. Well, day two and day three were the autopsies coming back, and, you know, none of the throats were slashed and none of the genitals were cut off, and that all these people died from gunshot wounds, and the only people with guns were the state police. So the tables turned around pretty quick at that point, and we saw like a huge wave, not just in New York State, but across the country, of prison reforms and basic necessities of life being better provided for by the prison system, and even educational opportunities and things like that coming into prison. So, I mean, that's kind of a Reader's Digest version of the Attica prison uprising.
But unfortunately, today we have a prison system which is now for profit, and it's like $1 or $2 a minute to make a phone call from prison. No soap provided, no.
You have to stay vigilant as an activist. You can't think that you're going to do a campaign or do an action and that it's going to fix things forever. Well, you know, what happens is the opposition is very vigilant. You know, they come in and you get like the Reagan presidency, especially, like really dialed back all those reforms that were won at Attica, and the Pickering governorship here in New York really pushed back a lot of those reforms. And now, I mean, you can still get a GED in prison, but it's hard to get anything else beyond that, and there's hardly any programs in New York State anymore. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of the stuff that had happened back in the 70s in prison happening again here in New York State. So you have to keep fighting. I mean, Attica won a major victory, but if you don't follow that up with more Atticas, essentially, you know, that victory is short-lived. You have to keep fighting and keep working, and it's not easy.
Yeah, just recently, in the past month, we had the death of Hugo Pinel. One of the original San Quentin Six was just assassinated while in prison. And if you read some of the descriptions about that, the guards were celebrating, and that they knew this was going to happen even before it happened.
Yeah.
So, but to be, what do you call it, optimistic, like you are, and I appreciate, your attitude is just keep pushing forward.
Yeah, you gotta keep fighting. There's no other option, and you know, I don't think that there's ever a solution. It's not like, you know, we can just change the power structure and everything's going to be okay. I mean, a revolution is about a constant revolving around of the way things are. It's constant work. You know, if people don't want to do work, well, then that's why we're in the situation that we're in, where other people are making decisions for us and other people are taking care of everything for us, and we're just sitting around complaining about it. But you know, if you really want to live in you don't want to adjust society, then you have to participate in that society, and part of that is struggle. You know, so it's really not about just fixing a problem and then retiring. We're never going to retire. That's not what this is about. You can't expect a retirement. It's constant work to do the right thing, and so that's what I always encourage people to do, is realize that this is a struggle. It's going to be ongoing. It's never going to end. It's not like there's going to be a Rambo that comes in and solves everything, and then we can all just forget about it. That's not the way the world works. So be prepared for a long, hard struggle, because that's what we've got in front of us.
Yeah, and we have to realize that the conditions that we live under right now are intolerable, and we should not tolerate them. But now, how would you advise like a young guy coming up? He wants to channel his energy someplace. What would you advise him to what direction to go in?
Well, I think you got to follow your heart and your interest, you know. So I don't think there's any one direction for anybody to go in. But I think that if you have a good political basis for the way that you think and the way that you operate in this world, then no matter what you do, you know, it can be a kind of activism, essentially. So, you know, most importantly, stay on top of what's going on in the world and learn about our history, and not the history in the public school textbooks, but the real history of people's struggle in this world and in this country in particular, and then apply that. You can't just think like, oh, the Black Panthers did their thing back in the day, that was really cool. I mean, we're living here right now, and these problems persist. So you got to figure out what it is that you can do, and you have to be willing to make sacrifices and fight hard, and really dedicate your whole life to this. This is an ongoing thing, and there's really not, in my opinion, there's not anything more righteous that you could be, dedicating your time and energy towards. This is the right thing to do. Fight for justice for everybody. Fight to protect this planet. Realize that you're committed to the struggle for the long haul. It's not just a game or a hobby or something that you're going to do, solve the problem and go home. I mean, this is it, and we're in it. And the revolution is the liberation, in essence. By struggling, you're becoming liberated. Liberated isn't like a permanent state. It's a state that comes because you're fighting. And I'm not going along with the system. I'm fighting back. Me and my community are standing strong against this, and we know where we stand on this issue, and this is what we're going to do about it. So it's important to have a good understanding of what's going on and apply it every day.
We got about a minute left. What are you working on next? Any books coming out or events?
I got a couple book projects that I'm working on now. I'll be doing something on all the surveillance sooner or later, but that'll happen after I get my 30,000 FBI file pages. So that'll be a few years from now. Right now, I'm really working hard on exposing the FBI for the surveillance they've done against me and others in the radical environmental movement, and fighting back. We're suing the FBI, and we're getting these pages, and we're trying to get a lot of exposure, and that's actually a lot of work. So that's a really big project of mine right now. And also this bookstore. I mean, it's a constant, exciting, cool thing to be doing here. We bring in speakers all the time and have cool events here all the time. So those are my main projects right now.
Okay, great. And anything that comes up, you got an event coming up you need to promote, just shoot me an email, and we'll get you right on. Okay, brother?
Sounds great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Leslie James Pickering, thank you so much, the author of Mad Bomber Melville. Keep in touch, brother. We'll be talking soon, okay?
All right. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.